morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Town of Portland Board of Education podcast. I'm your host, Dave Kuzminski, and we are live here in the Town Tech Educational Podcast Studio. And with us in the studio is our Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Charles Britton. So, hi, Charles. How are you?
Hello, everyone. Hi, Dave. How we doing?
Did you survive the chilly night last night? Did you bring in all your plants?
Oh, it was nice. Open the windows, put an extra blanket on. Wonderful.
Yes, exactly.
It was great.
All right, we're getting down to crunch time, the end of the year, Charles. So, what do we got?
Yeah, no,
we got a lot to cover.
Yeah, we're gonna land the plane successfully. It's been a good year. You know, I think that our mantra this year was to return to a sense of stability, and I guess I'd give us pretty high marks. Mission accomplished there, right? We finished the year strongly. We passed the budget recently. Now comes the wrap up the year and get ready for next year, and all the neat things are happening. Prom was the other night, and we have senior awards night and graduation and moving up ceremonies and retirement parties and all of the things that are fun ways to mark and celebrate some accomplishments. So
sure,
it's a great time of year.
Great, fantastic. All right, where do you want to start? I know we wanted to do some facility stuff.
Yeah, so I'd love to spend this podcast with you talking about the next, what I think may be 5 to 7 years of Portland Public Schools. Right. So I've mentioned it in previous podcasts, but for the past 2 years now, a committee called the Portland Facility Study Committee has been meeting and considering what we want to do with our aging infrastructure, our schools, and how different ideas, scenarios, options might affect things like people's property tax bills, the mill rates, how much all this would cost, and of course grade level configurations, and in my mind, most importantly, how these things would affect school climate and culture, and most importantly, teaching and learning. So the committee met actually the same night we learned the budget passed and voted on a report. So I have in front of me in this podcast studio the report.
There we go.
That has some recommendations for the town. And this report is going to be shared at a joint Board of Education, Board of Selectmen meeting either May 24th or May 30th. And I'm excited to talk to you about it today. And people can either then hopefully listen to this podcast or read the report.
There we go. Well, let's do it.
All right, good. So let me just start, and I'll be brief. I just want to spend about 90 seconds here talking about how did we get here, right? I mean, because I think nothing happens in a vacuum. Portland Public Schools have been here for a very long time, right? And have evolved over the years.
Yes.
So right now we are running 3 elementary schools, pre-K to 1 Valley View, grades 2, 3, 4 Gildersleeve, grades 5, 6 Brownstone, grades 7, 8 middle school, and grades 9, 12 high school. So we're running the 5 schools for 1,200 students, which is a lot, right? It's a lot of schools, all with overhead, right? That comprise the schools. A lot of changes. I mean, students are kind of just getting settled in one school and moving to another, right?
Yeah.
So I guess some people might want to know, well, how did we get to this, right? And the first part of the report, I hope people take a look at, paints a picture of how we got here. And while the entire scope of history in Portland is informative and interesting, it starts really from the year 2000, right? Which is when, for some of our longer time residents, people will remember that the town was asked for about $30 million to fund a brand new school and to renovate to new the high school. And out of that came Portland Middle School and Portland High School, which opened in 2005.
As Portland Secondary
Schools and has led us to this point, right? So what happened, though, was when the town built a new middle school, they didn't close any of the existing schools. It just was, okay, we'll spread them out further in grades pre-K to 6. And that's why the 3 elementary schools are all 1 or 2 or 3 grade levels and relatively small, right? And I'm not second guessing anyone, but it's an objective fact that sometimes when you build a new school, you can close another school because you don't need that square footage.
Yeah.
As a result of that, we have way more square footage in our schools than we need.
Right.
Right. Which is interesting, right? I mean, but yeah, it makes sense. You built a school, you didn't close any other school, you just spread kids out further. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of what happened. And that's kind of what led us to this point. And as a result of that, the high school, middle school, they're about 20 years old now. But the elementary schools, we haven't done any major capital projects on those since the 90s.
Yeah, and those are schools built in the 60s.
Yes, and Brownstone was built in the 30s, right?
Oh, yes.
So, I mean, those schools, and the town hasn't really largely made major capital investments in those, in large part because they did make a major capital investment in the new middle school and high school.
Yeah.
Now, the good news is that the $30 million that the town of Portland borrowed to pay for the middle school and high school, that bond is about to retire.
Yep.
Mortgage paid.
Yep.
Right? Now it's time to turn our attention to the 3 elementary schools that need a lot of work.
Yep.
Right. So that's kind of the background of how we've gotten here. One thing we did as a committee was we actually commissioned 2 groups of professionals. One called Sightlines, which is an architecture firm, and another architecture firm called Fryer.
Okay.
Both of those groups came in and they did a comprehensive look at the 3 elementary schools. Mm-hmm. Between the 3 elementary schools and the secondary school, which is in less dire condition, there's about $30 million worth of work that needs to be done. Uh-huh. Right? That's a lot of money.
Yes.
So and that $30 million worth of work, folks have to understand, isn't really anything all that fancy.
Right.
It's roofs and boilers and windows and code and electrical and the things you need to run a building.
Yep.
It's not like adding a lot of new stuff that you would see. It's
right.
replacing existing stuff that's falling apart.
Yep.
Right? Asbestos abatements and all of those kinds of things. So what we asked ourselves as a committee was, hey, is that what we want to do? Do we want to spend $30 million to fix up what we have? Mm-hmm. Or would it be better to spend maybe a little bit more, 32, 33 million, to reconfigure, downsize a little bit, and then reap some savings from that consolidation?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Because what I think people need to understand is that when you run, I would use the following analogy, Dave. You live in a family of 4 lives in one house. Yep. Right? If that family of 4 decided that they wanted to live in 2 houses, how much more expensive would it be?
Well, you've got utilities for another house. You've got assets,
Right. Now, what would happen if that family of 4 decided to all live in 3 houses?
Okay. There again.
Right. The mortgage, the electric bill, the snow removal, and then, of course, maintaining those schools require people. Yes. Right? You'd have to mow the lawns and do the things. Right?
Yep.
So that's where we're at. To have 3 elementary schools, it's very expensive.
Yep.
You have to pay for principals and teachers and
sure.
library media specialists and nurses and
custodians,
transportation and electricity and all of those things. So if we invested the $30 million and stayed the same, not only would we have to pay back the $35 million, mm-hmm. but we would also then have to pay for all of the buildings in terms of the faculty and staff necessary to run them mm-hmm. and the bills necessary to pay for them.
Yep.
I think that makes
the upkeep.
Yeah, the upkeep and the overhead. So the committee looked very carefully at that and figured out that if you reduced from 3 elementary schools to 2, it would save about $780,000 a year mm-hmm. because you could reduce a principal, you could reduce a nurse, you could reduce secretaries, you could reduce custodians, you could consolidate some services, right? Now, we have to understand that means, yes, some people may be laid off, right? That's the reality of it.
Yeah.
Now, hopefully we would do that over time as people retired or got other jobs. Yeah. Attrition. That's why it's important to think ahead, so we're not surprising this on anybody right now. But the idea here is consolidate schools, cut down on the overhead and staffing needs, and then you have fewer schools that could become, especially if you put the money into fixing them up, better for teaching and learning.
Sure.
So here's the big drum roll. The recommendation is to decommission Gildersleeve,
Yep.
to turn Valley View into a pre-K to 3 school, and to turn Brownstone into a grade 4, 5, 6 school. And you would do that by adding a wing onto Valley View, creating about 10 more classrooms
Yep.
for grades 2 and 3. And at Brownstone, it's big enough for the extra class. But essentially, you got Brownstone, put in some air conditioning, and take it out of the 1930s.
Yep.
And bring it into the 2030s. Right?
Yes. Yes.
And create a wonderful learning space for students in grades 4, 5, 6. All in, that's about $35 million of expenses that would be leveraged against about $35 million that we would be eligible for in state reimbursement.
There you go.
And that's the drum roll moment.
And that's in a nutshell.
That's it in a nutshell. So specifically, here are the recommendations that the committee and I am going to share with the Board of Education and the Board of Selectmen. Recommendation 1. The committee recommends reorganizing the Portland Public Schools by decommissioning Gildersleeve Elementary School, renovating to new and extending Valley View Elementary School to create a pre-K to 3 school, and alterations and renovations at Brownstone to create a grade 4 through 6 upper elementary school. There's recommendation 1. To accomplish that, the committee is going to recommend that the Board of Selectmen form a new facility study committee to determine what will happen to Gildersleeve when it is decommissioned. Right. So some group of folks have to do a market analysis and figure out what to do with Gildersleeve. Because none of us want to see Gildersleeve boarded up and left vacant for the foreseeable future. I think it's fair for the town's people, especially those who live on Bartlett Hill and are neighbors of Gildersleeve, to say, well, fine, if you decommission Gildersleeve, what's going to happen to that property and building? Right now, we don't have an answer to that yet. Our recommendation is that another committee spend next year doing that research. Recommendation 3. The committee recommends the Board of Selectmen form a building committee to design alterations, renovations, and new construction at Valley View and Brownstone. So we need to get going with what would it look like? What needs to be done? And a building committee would be responsible for, and I would hope to be on it, I think I would have an important role on that, designing an education specifications report and a plan for what the new Valley View would look like and what the renovated Brownstone would look like, and specifically doing the hard work to get ready for that. Then the committee recommends that the Portland Board of Selectmen and Board of Education apply the savings, that $780,000 a year, instead of using that $780,000 a year to pay for these things at the elementary schools, use that money to start fixing up the secondary school and any other town buildings that need to be worked on.
There you go.
Like, it would be amazing if the town of Portland had a actual capital improvement fund.
Yes.
To do a lot of the capital improvements that we know are necessary. And the town hasn't always had that.
Well, that's the thing.
Here's the opportunity.
Absolutely.
Right? We would cut $780,000 out of the Board of Education operating budget, turn that over to the town and say, don't just use that to pay off any new notes. Use that as a funding source from which you could fix the roof at the secondary school, pave lots, replace boilers, fix up windows.
Do HVAC improvements.
And then you don't have to borrow the money.
Right.
And which, of course, then you don't have to pay the money back with interest. Pretty good idea, right?
Yeah, it works.
So here's how this would look. If this were to happen, so everybody can take a breath now. This isn't going to happen right away. The committee would recommend the following calendar to do these things. So this June, this report would be presented to the Board of Education, Board of Selectmen. The recommendation is that this July, the Board of Selectmen adopt resolutions forming these two new committees, the What to Do with Gildersleeve Committee and the Building Committee. that those committees would begin working all next year. So we would take all from essentially August 2023 until March 2024 to do our work, right? Then in March or April of next year, bring forward additional plans to the town, specifically what's going to happen to Gildersleeve, and how much all of this is going to cost in renderings and blueprints and all of the things that we would need. If that were to happen, I would hope that in June or so next year, the Board of Selectmen would hear these things and say, we like these ideas, let's go. Of course, then we would need a bonding referendum, right, to ask the town of Portland to approve these things. We would need to share these plans widely. I'd be doing podcasts and going on the road and sharing the plans with everybody. The hope is that the presidential election, November 2024, will be a very anxious time for all of us, right?
Yes, it will.
That at that federal election, we also have on the ballot an ask of the town of Portland to approve the funding for this plan, right? If that were to happen, we would be in a good place to spend that whole year after the referendum applying to the state for reimbursement, hiring construction companies, getting ready to do the work. So now I'm 2 years out. Right. So now imagine all of that goes as recommended. September 2025. So again, this is far out. But I'm talking September 2025. What we would do would be to decommission Valley View by moving grades pre-K to 2 to Gildersleeve, grades 3 to 5 to Brownstone, and grades 6 to the middle school for 1 year. That would then empty out Valley View, which would allow the guys with the hard hats and sledgehammers and jackhammers to go into Valley View and do their work. September 2026, we would decommission Brownstone by moving pre-K to 3 to Valley View, grades 4 to 6 to Gildersleeve, which would then empty out Brownstone and allow the guys with the hard hats, jackhammers, and sledgehammers to get in there and fix up Valley View. Then September 2027, right? Now we're 5 years out, right? At that point, we would be ready to decommission Gildersleeve, move grades 4 to 6 to Brownstone, and then the town would be in a position to execute the plan for what happens to Gildersleeve. So there it is.
And that presents multiple options there, to either put Valley or Gildersleeve back on the tax rolls or another use or whatever,
See, and that's the hard part. We need more time because that was one of the elephants in the room was, what do you do with empty buildings? And here in Portland, we're very sensitive to the experience that the town had to the East Main Street building that's now the town hall. For years, that sat as a sort of blighted building.
16 years.
Sat there vacant. And I don't think anybody wants that. No, we don't want to put together a plan that says, well, we don't really know what will happen to Brownstone. Gildersleeve. But before we ask the people on Bartlett Road to support something, they need to know, well, Gildersleeve might go away. Might be demoed. In which case that could, I don't know, be a nice neighborhood. And how many houses could you fit on that property? Hey, maybe, again, could Gildersleeve become a retirement home or a condominium? I don't know. I'd be completely honest about that. Not my lane.
Exactly.
That's a lane for a group of talented people from the Board of Selectmen and others to figure out, with input from market realtors and market analysts and realtors, here are things that could be done with it. And what are the short-term costs and long-term costs of that? If it became a neighborhood of 7 to 10 houses, well, those 7 to 10 houses are going to need services from the town, but they're also going to pay their property taxes. So all of that, that's why we need more time. We need at least another year to figure these things out before we did anything. That's it. That's a lot, right?
Well, I think that's a lot to chew on. And I think, laying out the time frame, I think systematically, works. That way you're not shooting from the hip. You've got a distinct timeline. You've got distinct, charges. Okay. Now, when you look at the two committees, do you see the two committees as two separate committees, or do you?
I do. I do.
Okay.
I see the building committee is going to have to get into the weeds of what the new Valley View would look like.
Yep.
Literally where the wing would go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like how that would look.
Yeah.
And also take a look at Brownstone, which we know is a very old building and needs a lot of work.
Yep.
Would it be alterations? Would it be a full reno to new? And then, of course, right down to what kind of air conditioning would you put in there?
Right.
Because it is deeply uncomfortable in there when it gets above 80 degrees.
Yes. Yes.
So, that's why it's going to take another year of planning.
Sure.
Before we're ready to have the big reveal with pictures and renderings and
right.
and images of what these things will look like.
Right.
But what the committee has offered up to the town is really a 5 to 7 year strategic plan.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Something we're not just talking about starting next week. We're looking years ahead.
Yep.
And then trying to articulate a path. Now, as we know, all of these are, as you start going down this path, inevitably you're going to tack, right? You're going to adjust course.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's the thing.
But it's really important and healthy for towns to have that vision.
Sure.
Have that forward-looking
Absolutely.
Idea of what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So that if we can get behind that's a good destination. Let's go down this road.
Yeah.
We're all at least starting from an understanding of where we're going.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Well, and again, that's to your credit as far as in relation to recognizing the needs. Obviously, the town is certainly not any different than any other town with aging infrastructure and
right.
aging. Everything is aging. And to be able to upgrade that, and not only as far as upgrading the facilities, but also looking at his vision for educating our students going forward.
And at the end of the day, what I hope and I think the needle we've tried to thread here is one, an understanding that none of this is inexpensive.
No.
And that property taxes are always going to be high in Connecticut.
Yep.
This is what we pay to live in a first world country and in a first world state.
This is true.
And we enjoy these services, whether it's fire, police, library, town support, sanitation, public education. Mm-hmm. We pay those taxes and we enjoy those services.
Yeah.
Right. But we need to be fiscally prudent going forward so that we don't put us on an unsustainable path.
Well, you need return on investment.
Yes, it puts us on a sustainable path by downsizing.
Yeah.
And creating a structure where you're not paying for more than you need to pay for.
Exactly.
So I think that was needle threaded one. Needle one threaded.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Needle two threaded is that at the end of this, our pre-K to 3 students and 4 to 5 students are going to have 2 beautiful schools with healthy indoor air quality, designed with school security in mind.
Yep.
And creating the learning space for our teachers to teach and our students to learn that will be state of the art.
Yeah.
The opposite of what we have now.
Well, again, everything is aged. Yeah. We are all aging,
Right. And if anybody doesn't believe me, I would be happy to provide anybody hearing the sound of my voice a tour of the buildings.
Sure.
Or if you don't want to go for a tour of the buildings, talk to anybody who works in or learns in Valley View, Gildersleeve, and Brownstone.
Yeah.
And they will describe for you some aging facilities that at certain times of the year are deeply uncomfortable to be in.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that's good.
Or you can talk to my facilities director.
See?
He will tell you that there's only so much paint and duct tape.
Well, yeah, you can't paint it what it ain't.
Right.
As far as that goes, for sure. Well, that's great, Charles. I think that'll be a lot. And now you're going to be sending this report out via email? Or?
So my goal is as soon as this podcast is in the can and ready to go, I plan to send this podcast, the report, and the date for the joint Board of Education, Board of Selectmen meeting out on the listserv and post it all online. And then folks can either A, read the report, B, listen to this podcast, or C, come to the
Board
joint meeting and learn about it, or D, all of the above.
Yeah, there you go.
Or give me a call or an email, and I'd be happy to talk you through it.
Great. That's awesome. That's awesome. All right. Well, I think we covered a lot here, Charles. Again, we're getting down to the end of the year, so graduation is coming up June 12th.
Yes. Yep.
And so forth. So we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel.
At the end of the tunnel.
And things are progressing on the track. We're going to be starting to
July 1, I hope.
July 1 to see
before, maybe.
and before to see some progress being made on that front and go from there. So a lot of good things happening. So,
a lot of good things happening.
Fantastic.
Great town.
All right, Charles. Dr. Charles Britton is in the house, ladies and gentlemen, and that concludes this episode of our district podcast, and I believe this is episode number 29. So we will get together in a few more weeks to give you updates and going forward, but in the meantime, have a safe end of the year, and we will catch you in a little while. So thank you, Charles. Good to see you.
My pleasure.